A folded piece of paper fell out of another woman's coat pocket in my living room, and that single sheet ended up costing my husband everything he built in 26 years. My name is Renata Voss. I'm 45. And on the night my marriage ended, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw a single plate. I stood in my own kitchen, picked up a phone that wasn't mine to touch, and typed 4 words that set a trap neither of them saw coming. This is the story of the quietest revenge I've ever heard of, and how staying calm turned out to be the most dangerous thing I could have done to the people trying to destroy me. Because sometimes the loudest thing you can do to a person who's underestimated you is say absolutely nothing at all. You know that feeling when something is wrong before you have any proof it's wrong? Not suspicion exactly, just a hum under the surface of your life, like a refrigerator you've stopped noticing until the power goes out and the silence hits you. I'd had that hum for months. I told myself it was nothing. Marriages get quiet after 2 decades. People get tired. People get distant. I filled the gap with explanations that let me keep sleeping at night, because the alternative was unbearable. Looking back, I can list every single sign I talked myself out of. The way Julian started angling his phone screen away from me at the dinner table, like it was reflex instead of choice. The way inventory weekends at the vineyard started happening more often than the harvest calendar could explain. The way he'd come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, and I'd tell myself it was probably a customer, a client, nothing worth mentioning. We build these little bridges of explanation to walk over the gaps in our own denial, and I built mine carefully, plank by plank, for the better part of a year. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there right now, sensing the shape of something you can't name, doing the math on late nights and vague answers and hoping you're wrong, because being right means your whole life gets rearranged. Maybe you've already caught yourself rehearsing the conversation you hope you'll never have to have. I was wrong to hope, and I was about to find out exactly how wrong, in my own kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday, with a pot of pasta sauce still simmering on the stove. Stay with me, because what happened over the next 3 weeks in my house wasn't luck. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision I made in the first 90 seconds after my world cracked open. A decision to gather truth instead of react to pain. And it's the reason I walked out of this with my dignity, my finances, and my children still speaking to me. Most people, in the moment their marriage collapses, do the thing that feels natural. They scream, they confront, they demand answers right there in the kitchen. I understand that instinct completely. It's the human instinct, but it's also the instinct that hands all your power to the person who broke your trust in the first place, because it tells them exactly how much you know, exactly how hurt you are, and exactly how to manage you going forward. I did the opposite, and by the end of this story, you'll know exactly what to do in the moment everything falls apart. Not what you feel like doing in the heat of it, but what actually protects you, your finances, your children, and the version of the truth that history will remember. Because there's a difference between reacting and responding, and that difference is the entire reason I'm still standing here, able to tell you this story with a clear head instead of a shattered one. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were pasta night, and I was scraping sauce off the good pot when Julian's phone buzzed against the counter. He was upstairs, running the shower the way he always did after a long day at the vineyard, hot enough to fog every mirror in the house. The screen lit up next to the fruit bowl. I wasn't looking for it. I want to be clear about that. I was drying my hands on a dish towel when the words arrived on their own, uninvited, the way bad news always is. Tonight was worth the wait. Same time Thursday? No name attached. Just a string of numbers I didn't recognize. I want to tell you my heart pounded. That adrenaline took over. It didn't. Something colder happened. Everything in me went very, very still, the way water goes still right before it freezes. I stood there for a moment just staring at the glow of the screen against the granite, at the ordinary fruit bowl sitting beside it, at the pot of sauce still bubbling gently on the stove behind me. The whole scene looked exactly like it had 30 seconds earlier. Nothing about the kitchen had changed. Only I had changed, and the kitchen didn't know it yet. I'd never once looked through Julian's phone in 26 years of marriage. I'd always told myself that trust meant not needing to check. But trust, I was learning, is just a story you tell yourself until the evidence shows up on a countertop at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. His passcode was our anniversary. I typed it in without letting myself think about what that meant. That some part of him still wanted me to be able to get in, even while he was busy shutting me out. The thread went back weeks. Photos I won't describe, plans, a woman's name saved simply as V. I didn't sob. I didn't call up the stairs. I did something that surprised even me. I picked up his phone and typed back 3 words. Come by tonight. Then I set the phone down exactly where I found it, screen side up, angle untouched, and sat down on the kitchen stool to wait. The shower kept running. The dishwasher hummed through its cycle. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and went quiet. I counted the minutes because counting gave my hands something to do besides shake. I sat down on the bar stool and folded my hands in my lap like a woman waiting for a job interview instead of the end of her marriage. My reflection caught in the dark window across the room. Steady eyes, composed mouth, nothing on the surface to suggest that underneath it, my mind was sprinting through every version of who V might be. A woman from the tasting room, a regular customer, someone from the gym. I ran through faces from the last 2 years of my life like flashcards, looking for the one that fit. 14 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to a woman I recognized instantly. Verity Kastner, the event planner who'd coordinated the last 2 harvest galas for Julian's winery. Early 40s, camel-colored coat, the kind of composed beauty that comes from careful effort rather than luck. Her face didn't just fall when she saw me. It emptied. Is Julian here? She managed. He's expecting you, I said, and stepped back to let her in. She hesitated on the threshold the way people do when their body understands a situation their brain hasn't caught up to yet. Then she walked past me, and I caught the perfume, something warm and expensive that I now realized I'd smelled on Julian's collar more than once and explained away as cologne testing at the tasting room. We stood in my living room in silence. Upstairs, the water shut off. Feet crossed the bathroom floor. And then Julian came down the stairs in a t-shirt and sweatpants, towel-dried hair, completely unprepared for what was waiting for him. He stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. I watched his eyes move from me to Verity and back. And here's the detail that told me everything. There was no shock on his face. Just recalculation. The look of a man doing math, not a man who'd been caught off guard. They'd imagined this moment before. Maybe not exactly like this, but some version of it. You could see it in the way neither of them reached for an excuse. They just looked at each other first, like they were checking whose turn it was to speak. Renata, Julian started. I didn't answer him. I looked at Verity instead, and asked the only question that mattered. How long have the two of you been waiting for me to make this easy for you? Nobody answered. The grandfather clock in the hallway, the one my mother left us, ticked through 11 full seconds of silence before Verity finally spoke. Something about misunderstandings, about talking like adults. I raised one hand, not sharply, just enough to stop her. You were in the shower, I said to Julian. Then your phone lit up, and now she's standing in my living room. Which part of this needs explaining? Verity moved toward the door not long after that, flustered and eager to be anywhere else. As she brushed past the side table, something slipped from her coat pocket and landed on the floor without her noticing. A folded printout. I waited until the door clicked shut behind her before I picked it up. It was a real estate listing, a lakefront cabin 2 hours north, already under a signed deposit, registered to a shell company I'd never heard of. Julian stood there in his damp t-shirt, and for the first time in 26 years, I looked at my husband and didn't recognize a single thing about him. This isn't what you think, Julian said once the door was shut. The sentence came out too smooth, like he'd rehearsed it in the shower, which, I realized with a strange, distant clarity, he probably had. Talking, I repeated back to him, the word he'd used to describe 14 weeks of a woman's name saved as a single letter. That's what you're calling this. He tried the next line. We should sit down. Talk like adults. The exact phrase Verity had used minutes earlier. They'd built this script together, brick by brick, somewhere I wasn't invited. I asked him again, quieter this time. How long have you two been planning this? He rubbed the back of his neck, a habit I recognized from every uncomfortable conversation we'd ever had, and finally said, a few months. It started as nothing. But Renata, you know this marriage has been running on fumes for years. I thought about every late meeting at the vineyard, every inventory weekend, every time Verity had shown up at our events with just the right question about our anniversary, our kids' school schedules, which side of the bed I slept on. I thought about the Harvest Gala 2 years ago, when Verity had complimented my dress and asked, almost offhandedly, whether Nora was still applying to schools out of state. At the time it felt like small talk. Now it felt like reconnaissance. She knows things, I said slowly. Things you only tell someone you've let all the way in. He didn't deny it. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, because I needed one ordinary motion to hold on to. Behind me, his phone still sat innocently on the counter, glowing faintly, the device that had just rearranged the entire architecture of my life. We didn't plan to hurt you, he said finally. But people change. I set the glass down without a sound. I'm not making this harder for you, Julian. I'm simply done making it easy. He reached for my arm. I stepped back before he could touch me, because his hand, once the most familiar thing in my world, now felt like something transactional, something with terms attached. Go to bed, I told him. We both need to think. He climbed the stairs slower than I'd ever seen him move. I sat alone at the island with the folded listing in front of me under the kitchen light, and I understood this wasn't a fling. This was an exit plan, and exit plans need paperwork, which meant somewhere in this house, there was more. The next morning I made coffee like it was any other Wednesday. Julian left for the winery with a crooked tie and a habitual kiss on my cheek, which I allowed only because reacting would have cost me the element of surprise. The moment his car left the driveway, I opened his home office. It smelled like leather and old paper, like it always had. I went through the drawers methodically, not frantically, the way you search a house you've lived in for 2 decades and know better than its owner does. In the bottom drawer, under a stack of vineyard invoices, I found a folder. Inside were more printouts of the lakefront cabin, a draft separation agreement, dated 6 weeks earlier, 6 weeks before that phone ever buzzed on my counter. A handwritten list dividing our assets in Julian's own writing, and a single note, in pencil, that stopped my breathing entirely. She'll fight it at first. Wait until Nora leaves for school in September. Nora. Our daughter. 19 years old, about to start her sophomore year 2 states away. They hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been waiting for my own child to leave home so they could clear the house of witnesses before dismantling my life. The betrayal wasn't an event, it was a calendar. I sat in his office chair for a long moment with that note in my hand, looking out the window at our backyard, at the maple tree we'd planted the year Nora was born, now taller than the roofline. 26 years of ordinary Tuesdays had led to this drawer, this folder, this sentence written in pencil like it was a grocery list instead of a plan to dismantle a family. I let myself feel exactly one wave of grief pass through me, and then I pushed it back down because I knew if I let it in fully right then, I wouldn't get back up off that chair for a long time. I photographed every page. Careful lighting, careful angles, careful hands. Evidence, I told myself, not grief, not yet. Grief would have to wait its turn. I called my sister-in-law, Corinne, who'd survived her own brutal divorce 8 years earlier. She picked up on the second ring and knew something was wrong before I said a word. Men like Julian don't fear tears, she told me once I'd laid it all out. They fear paperwork. Document everything. Don't confront him again yet. And whatever you do, don't move out of that house. She gave me a name before we hung up. Desmond Farr, a family attorney 2 towns over. Old-fashioned, she said. Doesn't do drama. Does strategy. That afternoon, Nora called from her dorm, breezy and unaware. Dad texted me yesterday, she said. Asked if I'd be upset if you moved closer to Grandma. Said you two might need some space. Is everything okay? The floor tilted under me. Julian was already rewriting the story for our daughter, casting himself as the reasonable one and me as the woman who needed space. I kept my voice level and told her we were sorting through some things, that she should focus on her classes, that I loved her. When I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time, watching the rain start, tracing the first fat drops as they slid down the glass. I thought about the man who'd once carried me over that threshold, who'd taught Callum to ride a bike in the driveway, who'd sat up with Nora through her first heartbreak at 16. That man felt like a stranger now, replaced by someone capable of quiet, patient calculation. But standing there, I realized I wasn't helpless the way I might have been years earlier. I had Corinne's voice in my head, paperwork first, and a folder already growing in a hidden email draft. I met Desmond Farr the next day in his small downtown office that smelled like coffee and filing cabinets. He was unhurried, precise, the kind of man who'd clearly heard every version of this story before. "Do you want revenge?" he asked, flipping through the photos on my phone. "Or do you want protection?" "Both," I said. "Protection first." He nodded. "The joint funds moving into whatever company she's using, that matters. And this note about waiting for your daughter to leave, that shows premeditation. That's not a mistake anymore. That's a plan. It'll matter later." His instructions were simple. Keep documenting, stay in the house, sign nothing, and let Julian believe I was still in shock. "The more comfortable he gets," Desmond said, "the more he'll slip." I left his office that afternoon with a folder of notes and a strange new clarity settling over me. The drive home felt different than the drive there had. I wasn't just reacting to what had happened to me anymore. I was building something, a case, a timeline, a version of events that no amount of rehearsed speeches could talk anyone out of later. That evening, Julian came home with a bottle of wine from a vineyard we'd visited on our honeymoon, of all things, and poured 2 glasses like we were celebrating something. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, sliding a glass toward me. "Maybe we've both just been unhappy for a while. But I still care about you, Renata. Deeply." I took the glass and thanked him, and inside I cataloged the performance the way I'd catalog anything else now, noting the practiced softness in his voice, the way he'd chosen a wine loaded with sentimental weight, the careful construction of a narrative where nobody was really at fault. "It's a lot to take in," I told him, and let him believe I meant it the way he wanted me to. Julian tried a new approach that week. Flowers, my favorite takeout, soft comments about how we'd both been unhappy, but he still cared. I accepted every gesture with quiet grace and gave him nothing real in return. Every night I added new notes to a file on my laptop, the way he angled his phone away from me now, the sudden concern about my mother's health, the rehearsed warmth in his voice. Nora called again a few days later, more uncertain this time. "Dad made it sound like moving was your idea," she said. "Mom, is something wrong?" The manipulation stung more than I expected. He wasn't just leaving, he was engineering it so that I'd be remembered as the one who walked away. I kept my voice steady and told her we were working through grown-up things, that she shouldn't worry. After that call, sitting alone in my kitchen, I understood the full shape of what he was doing. He wasn't simply unfaithful. He was patient, and patience is so much harder to fight than passion. One evening that week, I found myself sitting on the floor of our closet, going through an old shoebox of photographs neither of us had looked at in years. Julian found me there and sat down beside me, picking up a picture from our honeymoon like it might soften something between us. "Remember that trip?" he asked quietly. "I remember," I told him, and closed the box before he could steer the moment any further. The memories didn't feel like mine to protect anymore. They felt like evidence of a version of us that had already stopped existing, whether I'd known it or not. I met with Desmond once more before the gala. He looked over my growing file, the screenshots, the bank statements, the photographs of that folder from Julian's office, and nodded with quiet approval. "You're building something airtight," he said. When the moment comes, you won't need to raise your voice. The paper will do it for you. I asked him what he meant by the moment, and he simply said, "You'll know it when you see it." Sometimes the room matters more than the argument. I didn't understand fully what he meant until the invitation to the anniversary gala arrived in the mail a few days later, embossed in gold lettering, celebrating 26 years of the business Julian and I had built together from nothing. I looked at that invitation for a long time before I understood exactly what kind of room Desmond had been describing. Desmond reviewed my growing file at our next meeting and nodded once, satisfied. "You're doing this exactly right," he said. "Stay put. Keep gathering. When the moment comes, we'll be ready." That moment arrived faster than I expected. At the 25th anniversary gala for Julian's Winery, held at the Regional Country Club with 200 guests, business partners, longtime friends, our entire extended family, and Verity, listed officially on the program as event coordinator. Julian asked me to attend as a united front for the business, for the kids. I agreed, and I wore the pearls he'd given me on our 20th anniversary, and in my clutch I carried a thin envelope, bank statements showing joint funds diverted to Verity's company, the lakefront listing, and a photographed copy of the note that named our daughter's move-in date as the trigger for his exit. The ballroom that night glittered with string lights and centerpieces of late-season grapes, and for a moment, standing at the edge of it in my pearls, I almost let myself believe I was just there for an anniversary party like any other. Old friends complimented my dress. Business partners shook Julian's hand and told him 26 years was something to be proud of. Nora and my son Callum both seemed relieved to see us standing close together, laughing at the right moments, playing the parts we'd played for decades. Julian's toast that night was masterful. 26 years, he told the room, voice warm through the microphone. And none of it possible without my incredible wife, Renata, who stood beside me through every challenge. Sometimes life asks us to make brave changes, to step into new chapters with grace. I watched the room nod along, watched Verity smile from the side wall like a woman who'd already won, watched my son and daughter exchange a hopeful, confused glance. I could feel the envelope in my clutch pressing lightly against my hip, and I thought about how strange it was that a piece of paper that small could weigh so much. When the applause faded, I stood up. "Before my husband talks about brave changes," I said, walking to the front, "I think this room should know exactly who's been planning them." I laid out the bank records, the listing, the note, in his own handwriting, naming the week our daughter would be gone. Gasps moved through the room like wind through wheat. Julian's face went rigid. Verity turned the color of the tablecloths. "I'm not here to make a scene," I told 200 silent faces. "I'm here to make sure the truth gets remembered correctly." My son stood at our table, staring at his father. "Dad, is this true?" Julian reached for the microphone, said something about stress, about privacy, about this not being the time. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "You chose this room to talk about brave changes. Now the room knows what those changes actually looked like." Verity slipped toward a side exit. Corinne, standing quietly nearby, stepped into her path, not touching her, just present. "Leaving won't make the paperwork disappear," she said. "A few of Julian's oldest business partners wouldn't meet my eyes on the way out. Others came by the table quietly to squeeze my shoulder, to say they were sorry, to say they'd had no idea." I understood both reactions. A fracture that sharp leaves everyone in the room unsteady, unsure where to stand. I sat back down, not in triumph, but in something quieter and heavier. The specific relief of a truth finally being witnessed by people who mattered. My son drove us home that night. My daughter cried in the back seat and then, somewhere near our street, wiped her eyes and said, "You didn't embarrass us tonight, Mom." He did. Julian moved out 2 weeks later. He looked older somehow, loading those last boxes into his car. Smaller than the man who'd once carried me over the threshold of that house. Smaller than the man who'd coached Callum's baseball team on Saturday mornings. Part of me still mourned him. Or at least mourned the version of him I'd spent 26 years believing in. But I didn't mourn the man who'd written that note in pencil. the one who'd been willing to wait for his own daughter to leave for school before pulling the floor out from under the rest of us. The divorce took the better part of a year, but the documentation Desmond had insisted on, every screenshot, every photographed page, every quiet observation I'd logged at midnight, meant the settlement reflected the truth of what had actually happened, not the story Julian had tried to write for himself. There was no arguing with dates, there was no arguing with his own handwriting. I think about that Tuesday night often, about how close I came to reacting instead of watching, about how the 14 minutes I spent sitting on that kitchen stool, saying nothing, taught me more about my own strength than the previous 26 years combined. I go back to that kitchen sometimes, even now, and the counter where his phone lit up doesn't feel dangerous anymore. It just feels like the place where I finally stopped making myself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. Here's what I know now that I didn't know then. The person trying to rewrite your story is counting on you to fall apart loudly enough that no one asks for the receipts. Don't give them that. Stay calm, stay quiet, gather everything, and when the moment finally comes to speak, make sure you're the one holding the paper. If this story hit close to home, tell me where you're watching from. I read every comment. And if you've ever had to stay composed while your entire life was quietly falling apart around you, I want to hear how you got through it. Drop your story below. There are more stories like this one coming. Real, raw, and worth hearing. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and I'll see you there.